Hello, it's Steve, and this is Brainless Raider, a puzzle adventure game made in 3 hours for Trijam 276. In this series, we're going step by step over the process of remaking the game in Bevy, the Rust game engine, in probably closer to 3 months. Last time in this series, we went through and consumed our collision enter event, which you can see there causes our goblinoid to be defeated in various ways. Today, we want to go through the process of making a sound when that happens, which is a little bit more complicated than just adding another line here. We're going to need to handle the sound files, as well as load them and keep a reference to them so that we can use them whenever we need to. So to start with, what we'd like to do is do a commands.spawn of a new audio bundle. The issue there is this audio bundle takes in a source, which is actually as you see here, a handle to an audio source. Now, we don't have a handle to an audio source because if we remember back when we were doing our level loading, the primary way that we interact with handles is when we're loading files and looking at resources that we've loaded in. So we need to go through the process of actually loading those first. And then we'll probably want some sort of audio server to pull those from. So I'm thinking this sort of a pattern. So this is the sort of pattern we're thinking of, where we can go into an audio server that we saved as a resource, which has the preloaded sounds on it, and then creates that sound effect, which we then spawn in. Theoretically, we can create another implementation where we just ask the audio server to create this kill, and then somewhere in a different system, the audio server resource is used alongside commands to then spawn that in. But I'm okay with this pattern for the time being. Let's go into the process of creating this audio server. Before we get too ahead of ourselves here, let's actually pull those sound resources in. Here in our little pre-work branch, that's quite a few commits ahead actually, we have our whole folder full of both WAV and OGG versions of these sound effects. I believe I'm using both of them because Linux, or at least my version of Linux, has some issues using WAV, which makes sense because WAV is, I believe, Windows audio format or something like that. So instead we'll be using OGG. So let's copy this over to where we're at, which is the video version. And here we have all of our sound effects. We'll also go into git ignore and make sure we ignore those OGGs because they're going to be really big files that we don't want to be committing to Git. That gets the files sorted. Let's create a Rust file for this new audio server feature. And we're going to be doing very similar things here as we have been doing for all of these modules. And for this implementation, we won't even really need components because we're using components that are predefined by Bevy. But we will need some resources to load these files in and to save them as an audio server. And of course, we'll need some systems to actually load the audio. Let's go into main and define this module real quick. So now anything we define in this file is going to work with a plugin. So first off, let's define this audio server that we're using over here. These will all be audio bundles that we can use. Now this doesn't actually fit directly in the way we're using it over here, so we're going to do some pseudo object-oriented magic to get that working. But just real quick to go over what these all are, click is the sound effect for clicking on things. Die is for when the adventurer dies. Dumb Raider is the background loop. Exit is for when the adventurer collides with a staircase. Kill is for when you collide with a goblinoid. Pickup is for collisions with treasure. And the portal is for collisions with the portals. And that pretty much covers like the entirety of what we need for this project. These are all just named after what I named them when working on the original Game Jam game. So we have these, but this isn't exactly what we need because we want to have a create method on here that creates a new audio bundle rather than just using this one. Now we could .clone it, but there's some other things that we want to change too. So instead of this, let's actually make our little wrapper structure around audio bundle that can do a few things for us. Actually, this is going to be an audio source, a playable audio source, because we want more than just an audio bundle. We want something that can be used to create audio bundles, which makes sense to be called an audio source. And this is actually going to be wrapping our references, our handles to the audio files themselves. So this is what we're actually going to be using here. How do we make it from us launching our app to having these handles to audio sources populated in this audio server? We need an intermediary step here, very similar to the way that we have an intermediary step with BRMap, where we have a list of map paths, which itself is a resource, and then this gets created during the plugin creation, after which a different system uses the map paths resource here to actually start loading in the handles to that map data. In a very similar pattern, we are going to be making a resource that holds the paths to the audio sources, and then we'll also create a system down here that translates those into handles to audio sources. So here's that basic resource that we're going to insert at the beginning of our app creation. In fact, let's do that right now. And there we go. We're creating a basic version of this resource with paths to all of our OGG files down here using resources as our root folder. Now let's also create another system for loading this audio. And this is going to insert a new resource that creates playable audio resources from the asset server load. Alright, so here we're just effectively creating that audio server, but now that we have access to the asset server resource, we can actually create some handles. Let's also, after we're done with this, we don't need the audio files resource anymore, so let's go ahead and remove it. Not strictly necessary. So we're almost done in the audio server, but the one thing is we don't actually have the method create that we're actually using here. That is going to be transforming this playable audio source into an actual audio bundle for the commands to spawn. So let's create that real quick. So here's the very basic way to do that. Self0 is, of course, pointing at our handle to our audio source, and that's what we're going to feed into the source of the audio bundle. We're defaulting for the rest of them. Now this is happy. We also need to remember to add our system. So now this should load up, and then when this is called, it'll create an audio bundle based on what's been loaded into it. Now this is happy, and that's happy. Let's see what happens when we run.
Good.
And if I did audio balancing correctly, you might actually have been able to hear that. We have, in fact, made a sound when stepping on our goblinoid. Hooray! So that works and that's fine and good. Let's actually, while we're at it, since we have all these sound effects already over here, why don't we actually also add our background loop in real quick. That we can do in setup because this is effectively our scene building function. Right here we're making a camera, so let's also make a background loop. And there we go. We're now spawning in a background loop. Just comment it to make sure we know what it's doing because this is not entirely obvious. And we'll see what we get.
Good.
Oh, look at that. We have some background music and the sound effect. But, sneaky me, we see an issue here. The background music isn't actually looping, it's only playing once. Now, how do we fix this? One way to fix this would be passing in some sort of flag, right, to the create function, which then we would be able to heed in the audio server, and we can tell it to update the playback settings to actually play back in a loop form. So if we're looking at true, then we're doing this. Otherwise, we're doing it in once mode. That's okay, but I don't really like the idea of just passing in a flag for this, and also, as we noted earlier, this isn't super obvious what we're doing anyway, and if we passed in a boolean flag here, we're creating true. What does that even mean? So, instead of that, what we're going to do real quick is duplicate this create function. One of them is going to be loop, which is the one I'm going to just leave on the bottom, and one of them is going to be once. And here, we'll just call this create one shot, And here we'll call it create loop. So now we have two distinct functions for whether we want to create a one-shot or create a loop. It's interchangeable solution with passing in a flag, but I like it a little bit better. So here in collision events, when we collide, we'll just call create one shot rather than create. And here up in setup, we're gonna actually call create loop. And now, we are in fact playing the background loop still. We're playing the collision event still. And if we wait long enough, you'll see that the background loop is still looping. Now, actually a fun story about this loop. There was actually 3 times as much audio in the original project file as got exported, but I accidentally exported only the first third of it and forgot to check until after I'd already closed the project. And of course I didn't save because it was a 3-hour game jam. So what we have here is now just the first third of what was created in a very limited amount of time. But I think it turned out all right for a background of such a minimalistic project. So I think this video is actually going to be pretty short. In fact, it would be too short if we ended it here. So let's add one more thing. And that would be, we want to at least get started with our collision logic with the treasure. So let's actually add a little function in here, a system for colliding with the treasures. The way our game works, we want both the adventurer and goblinoid to be able to collide with treasures. Now, we could make 2 separate functions here, and we might at some point do that because they might have different enough implementations. But my gut says one system will do, and we can just say whenever a mover touches a treasure, they'll pick up the treasure. So let's get that going. Alright, here's our method signature. Just real quick, we need commands so we can at least spawn the audio. We'll probably use the commands later anyway for whatever other logic exists here. We need our event reader to react to our event. Our mover query is going to find any movers. And our treasure query, well, it would find any treasures, except we don't currently have treasures defined. So let's add this in also. So this is actually its own type of component. It's a tag, effectively the same as goblinoid or adventurer. And let's go double check our tiled real quick to see whether or not we remembered. Yep, we remembered to add this into components. So this should automatically hydrate. With the one step we need to make here is registering it as a tag. So now with that registration, all of these treasures should have a treasure component on them, which means they'll be picked up now by this treasure query. So let's do a quick read with our event and talk through our thoughts there. So we're going and we're reading through our event collision enter, and then we are making use of our align entities function, which we created last episode, to make sure that if a mover exists and is one of these 2 entities that have just been read here, then it's going to be the one that is in the first place. We then make sure that we found a mover in the first place, and that the second place is then a treasure, and in that case, we're doing this logic here. Anyway, right now, we don't actually care about using these entities at all. We just need to know that this has happened. And since it has happened, we can do something very similar to the earlier call to the audio server, but instead of calling kill, we'll call pick up, which is the sound that was designed for treasure collection. Of course, need to also insert this event in much the same way as the other collision event. And alright, with that, both the goblinoid and adventurer should be making treasure pickup noises whenever they touch a treasure. Let's see. Alright, that one's kind of hard to hear, but I believe with the right amplification, it should be possible to hear it, or maybe you'll just need to take my word for it. In any case, we have successfully implemented an audio server, which supports one-shots and loops. Bevy made it actually really easy for us this time around, or it could just be we're getting better at using our brains in the Bevy way and interfacing with it. So that's it for this time. Next time, we will actually have our movers pick up the treasure, and we'll have the treasure follow us around a bit. We'll also implement treasure stealing, because the way that the game is designed, when a goblinoid picks a treasure and then the adventurer picks up the treasure, they both have them following, but if the adventurer kills the goblinoid, the treasure actually switches over to being part of the adventurer's train. So that should be a fairly involved episode, but realistically speaking, we have a large portion of the difficult code behind us on this project. So now we're just implementing what happens if different collisions happen. That's most of the rest of the code of this project. There'll be some interesting things in there. I believe the way that the treasure train actually works is going to end up being kind of complex, and in a few episodes we'll get around to doing click handling, which we haven't really talked about yet. Anyway, thanks for watching. Peace.